What does the new iPhone 14 Pro Max bring to the table, and how is it different from the already fast and long-lasting iPhone 13 Pro Max? There are a few things, but chief among them are two new features. A higher resolution 48-megapixel main camera and the new dynamic island that replaces the notch. Of course, Apple is also bringing its most advanced A16 Bionic chip to the new model, and along with the larger camera sensor, come a few other photo and video improvements. And while we have these exciting improvements, battery life has not changed in this new model, and neither have charging speeds, and if that's what you were hoping for, you may end up disappointed. So let's dive in those differences between the iPhone 14 Pro Max and iPhone 13 Pro Max and see if it's worth upgrading. Design and display quality. The iPhone 14 Pro Max largely keep the looks of its predecessor with the same screen size, flat sides and the familiar glass and stainless steel materials. There is a tiny change in the dimensions of the new 14 Pro Max. It's not quite as wide as the previous model, but it's so minuscule you probably won't even notice. What you will notice, though, is the new dynamic island pill-shaped system on the front, which replaces the notch. It eats up less space and gives the new iPhone 14 Pro series a look unlike any other phone. However, most impressively, it acts as a sort of a status bar for your current iPhone doings. Playing back music, you get a tiny waveform and album art. Using the maps, you get a little icon. Phone running low on battery, the warning pops up there. Cool. But is that a profound change that would warrant an upgrade? Not really. Another notable feature that the iPhone 14 Pro Max has over its predecessor is an always-on display. Android has had this for years, and now it's finally on the iPhone. Apple is using the new 1 Hz refresh rate so that it can dim the wallpaper with minimal battery drain. The one thing to know here is that it might just be a bit too on and a bit too distracting, but it's nice to be able to glance at your lock screen. We just wish Apple adds a bit more customization options to this. In terms of color options, the iPhone 14 Pro Max has 4: deep purple, gold, silver, and space black. The iPhone 13 Pro Max has 5 color variants: alpine green, silver, gold, graphite, and Sierra blue. What is not changing are the contents of the box. You only get a lightning cable and no charger inside. But what about the display? Both phones come with a 6.7-inch OLED screen with a nearly identical resolution. The iPhone 14 Pro Max, however, has thinner borders, so it looks a bit more elegant. Apple has also bumped the max brightness even further on the 14 Pro Max for a more comfortable outdoor viewing experience, reaching up to an incredible 2000 nits. We found this to be a bigger deal than it sounds. It makes viewing the new iPhone outdoors so much easier and is hugely appreciated. Both being Pro models, they have 120 Hz ProMotion for buttery smooth scrolling, but again, the iPhone 14 Pro Max can drop to just 1 Hz, while the 13 Pro Max stops at 10 Hz, which essentially means it does not have the always-on feature. When it comes to biometrics, the two use Face ID. Despite that new pill shape on the 14 Pro Max, it uses the same sensors and technology for face recognition as the 13 Pro Max, so the experience of using Face ID remains the same. Performance. Apple uses the new Apple A16 Bionic chip in the iPhone 14 Pro Max, an upgrade over the A15 in the 13 Pro Max. The A16 Bionic makes the jump to 4nm technology, a generational change from the 5nm tech used in previous iPhones. This allows the A16 to pack nearly 16 billion transistors, and it now comes with even more efficient CPU cores. Apple is also sticking with 6GB of RAM on the 14 Pro Max, just as it did on its predecessor. Camera. Apple has been a leader in camera quality, especially for video recording, but what new does it bring to the table this year? First, we see a larger 48-megapixel sensor in the main camera, a welcome change from last generation's 12-megapixel one. By default, the new 14 Pro Max still captures 12-megapixel photos by ways of quad-pixel binning. By combining 4 pixels into one, Apple can achieve better results in low light. However, you can also opt to shoot full-resolution ProRAW photos, just be warned that those take up a lot more space. Apple is also using this large sensor in one more clever way. It crops out the center of the sensor to give you optical quality 2x zoom without a 2x lens. 2x zoom is one of our all-time favorite focal lengths for portrait shots, and we are incredibly happy to see it back on the iPhone 14 Pro Max. One thing the iPhone 14 Pro Max still does not have is a long-range zoom lens. Android rivals like the Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra have had a native long-range zoom lens for several years now, but not iPhones. Audio quality and haptics. The iPhone 13 series made a huge leap in audio quality with boomier, richer sound, and audio quality is just as great on the 14 Pro Max series, and it gets even a tiny bit louder. Finally, don't forget that there is no headphone jack on either one, and it's probably not coming back ever in future iPhones. Haptic feedback also does not seem to have changed on the iPhone 14 Pro Max, but that's not a bad thing as it was already great on the iPhone 13 Pro Max, thanks to the Haptic engine. At the end of the day, the iPhone 14 Pro Max polishes up the winning formula that was the 13 Pro Max, but it feels more like a 13's kind of an upgrade rather than more. Sure, photo enthusiasts will appreciate the new 48-megapixel camera, which brings a lot more detail, and the new dynamic island is a really cool idea. The slight boost in performance with the A16 is probably even less noticeable, and in many other areas, this is pretty much the same phone as before. Overall, the 14 Pro Max does not quite feel like the generational leap in technology that would convince existing 13 Pro Max users to switch. And that is probably okay for a mature product, it's just a bit less exciting than one might have hoped for. In fact, if we were coming from an older iPhone and we found a better deal on the older 13 Pro Max, we would probably take that without thinking twice. Or just wait for the iPhone 15.